Perfect. And great talk, Ed and Eric. Really enjoyed that and tied right into my talk. So hope you stay around to listen. So I'm the CTO at Perception Point. And today, in the 20 minutes that I have, I'm going to just focus and zoom in, as Ron said, on the browser, which is, into our perspective, a major attack vector that you really should pay attention to in today's threat landscape. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to do a really quick recap of the top user-related attack vectors that we've seen in the past year. And to complement what Ed and Eric showed, I think it's aligned with what you presented, guys. I'm also going to then talk about the pros and cons of some of the traditional security approaches to try to protect the browser and web-based threats. So if you're looking to enhance your security in this area, and I think you should, that would be helpful, hopefully practical information for exploring different options. And third, I'm going to focus on some emerging modern approaches to prevent advanced web-based attacks. And I hope this will also be educational and useful for you as you look into that. So let's get started. So to complement the stats shown earlier, what we've seen in another great report from Verizon, the famous Beer report just released a few months ago, is that web and email come up as the top 2 attack vector and verified breaches based on a sample of thousands of breaches across verticals and industries. And even if you look at the top 5, you see human error, file downloads, malware coming over and over again. And in all of those, the common factor is the browser, right? If you get an email with a phishing link or with some kind of a document, it will typically open up through the browser. You will download the file there, or you'll get into a phishing website there. And whether it's from email or from any other SaaS app, you'll end up doing something wrong in the browser, as well as the other human errors and backdoors. They originate and involve a browser at some point, right? And on top of this, ransomware, as mentioned before, now 1 in every 4 breaches, according to the Beer, which is amazing. And if you think where ransomware is coming from, again, phishing link, email with links or attachments in email, or cloud storage, or any kind of SaaS app where you get the link and you download the malware, and from there the rest is known. So again, the browser plays a key part in those attacks and needs to be looked at, right? And third is the other aspect we didn't talk about today yet, I think, which is insiders, right? The internal actors. So when you look at breaches, it's not just about the external attack, the cybercrime, and so on, but also a disgruntled employee, or human error, or a third party that has access to your systems. And by the end of the day, this is 20% of all breaches, and something we have to look into. And again, if you think, how do insiders get to significant amounts of data? In many cases, it's simply by going to their SaaS app, where there's a lot of sensitive data, downloading, exporting the data, and copying it to wherever they want to copy it. So another reason we need to have security baked into the browser. So that's my point here, right? We need to make sure we look deeply into how we protect the browser. Because today, if you look at the attacker's perspective, there's more and more focus from the attacker's perspective on web apps. They know that the world has moved into SaaS, and we're no longer using fat clients and desktop apps and so on. We know that most users spend most of their time in the browser. So this is where the attackers are looking. And they actually find dozens of browser 0 days annually in Chromium, which means that they impact Chrome and Edge. And those vulnerabilities are critical vulnerabilities that within a single visit to the wrong website can take ownership over your endpoint. And this is something that you see over and over again, doesn't really stop. Beyond that, of course, they build phishing websites and they kind of make it more and more sophisticated to impersonate the brands like Microsoft and others to make sure that the victims fall into this trap and get provider credentials or download some malware in a watering hole. And even if it's an insider, as I mentioned, easy to extract data from the browser. Now, from the defender's side, it's hard to blame the security teams because they have so much on their plate, right? A lot of traditional attack vectors that they need to take care of. sometimes to check the box and pass an audit, sometimes because you need to invest in other areas. But sometimes the browser is staying neglected with insufficient protection, especially as the browser and the web is becoming more complicated. And the tools that have been working for us in the past decade are no longer appropriate, with the web becoming more encrypted end-to-end, and with all kinds of modern SaaS apps that are as complicated as a full desktop app. And also add to that remote work, COVID, hybrid work, where people are working from home and not necessarily having the traditional controls that they used to have in the perimeter, be it a secure web gateway or some kind of inspection of their traffic. And finally, people are doing things in the browser that also compromise your data, like client-side, browser extensions or malicious activity within the browser. And you want to make sure you're protecting against that. And in most cases, there's insufficient controls around what's happening actually inside the browser. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we are today. And if you're looking or planning to look into enhancing your web security and browser security, I picked just a few of the top approaches we see out there with our customers, how they try to protect against web threats, and kind of to cover what are the pros and cons and challenges that they bump into. So a major way to protect against web-based attacks is using a secure web gateway, sometimes part of a bigger category of solutions, be it SASE or Security Service Edge. There's a bunch of different ways that Gartner would call this today. But at the end of the day, this security solution is basically an appliance sitting either on-prem or in the cloud as a service, and inspecting URLs, doing monitoring and filtering of website categories, and so on. Today, they get a bit more advanced, and they have all kinds of threat defense and malware detection as part of the gateway. Sometimes even some kind of basic sandboxing that takes malicious executables and runs them in the sandbox in the cloud in some virtual machine before letting you have access, which is nice. But typically, the detection capabilities are pretty basic because they also want to do it very quickly or try to do so. Many of them have moved into also a cloud-based offering. But the challenges we see customers facing when trying to adopt this to protect the browser are first, the traffic costs of tunneling all of your traffic through a secure web gateway or a web proxy, the scalability issues it creates when everyone needs to go through those services, especially if they're on-prem. There's also degraded user experience inherently because you tunnel all of the traffic through those gateways. You add additional latency, and if you do detonation of or kind of running malware in a sandbox, it will take longer to download the file. Even the clean files have to go through some processing, which delays users, and they get frustrated, and the rest is known. Another aspect that they're missing is, when you go with a secure web gateway, you either decide to allow or block certain websites or web content. But in some cases, you don't have full confidence whether it's malicious or not. And each choice might be wrong, right? And you need a way to kind of move this from a lose-lose situation to a win-win situation where you let users access content, even if you don't trust it, but just in isolation. And that's something that those solutions don't really have, just the basic secure web gateways of the world. And they don't really have client-side visibility of what's happening inside the browser, what's happening with extensions, or when the traffic is fully encrypted in a way that they can't see into. So these are some of the challenges you bump into when you try to implement this in this day and age. And a complement to this technology, sometimes part of this is something called remote browser isolation, or RBI, where basically, instead of you using your own browser to visit risky or uncategorized websites, you go through some kind of remote virtual machine or remote container that runs a browser engine and renders the website before you get to see that. And then when you visit a malicious website with some vulnerability, or when you download a malicious file, it stays within that remote isolated browser, right? And the way the user sees the browser is by similar to how you would watch a video on YouTube via video streaming, or in some cases, they reconstruct the website, the DOM of the website, and build it back up in the endpoint. So they mess around with the website in one way or another to give you the feeling that you're running a normal browser, but behind the scenes, it's running remotely. Now, this is nice to give you secure access to this kind of risky websites. However, what most customers bump into is user experience challenges, especially if the users have high latency or low bandwidth connections, especially when they're working from home. This could really impact the experience. Like imagine every click you're doing, going to another hop in a remote browser before going to the final destination. What all you wanted to do is visit some cloud app. It has some website and browser compatibility issues because of this reconstruction of the websites or the streaming of the website view. Not all websites, especially modern websites, will work as is, which is a challenge and introduces some help desk tickets for teams. There's a high cost per user because eventually you need to pay for those remote virtual machines or remote containers. Someone will need to pay for that, and this will be expensive at scale if you do that. And there's challenges with all kinds of corner cases, which are now becoming more and more common when you need to do video conferencing within the browser or plug USB devices to authenticate or to print. So these solutions might suffer from those limitations. And finally, most solutions in this category focus on the isolation aspect, but don't have any serious threat detection or prevention, like advanced phishing detection. And that's something that can limit what they can do. And like if you get a social engineering attack, like a business email compromise or some phishing website asking for credentials, this won't help you against that because eventually, even if it's isolated, it doesn't really solve the problem. So that's kind of another category people are looking at when trying to secure the browser. And a third one is some enterprises that try to go with the native built-in browser security controls you have with Chrome or Edge, which are now becoming more sophisticated, but are still relatively basic. Both Chrome and Edge have things like data loss prevention controls, preventing you from doing clipboard copying and pasting of sensitive content or downloading files. You can limit that in all kinds of ways. They have a way to limit your browser extensions and do some basic detection of websites and downloads in the browser from Google or Microsoft, which is nice as basic hygiene. But eventually, in the real world, and what we do at Perception Point is providing this managed service that sees those kind of attacks at scale, including prevention of phishing and business email compromise and malicious downloads. And we see that in practice, those defenses are not really facing the threats in a good way, and threats go in regardless. And as a proof of that, also you can see the amount of ransomware and malware and phishing attacks that are successful. You know, if the built-in Chrome or Edge controls were working properly, you wouldn't have as many attacks going through. So again, another problem here is that you don't have significant isolation capabilities. Chrome, for example, is just running as another app on your OS, and if it has some vulnerability in it, then your machine can be owned and completely, hacked by the bad guys. And of course, no significant encryption of the downloaded data that users get through the browser. So if you download sensitive information, it stays on your disk for ransomware to collect and exfiltrate. And there's no real protection of the browser in this way. Those kind of top three ways to try to protect against web-based attacks and to protect the browser. And in light of these drawbacks of these solutions, there's been in the last year some emerging approaches that try to rethink web security and how we protect the browsers. And sometimes it's called browser security, sometimes it's called enterprise browser. But the main idea behind those approaches is to treat browsers as a critical line of defense that you treat seriously, not as an afterthought, but as an integral part of how you browse super risky or super sensitive web apps, and puts a lot of security controls around the browser, inside the browser. And this is a promising emerging category. And of course, the different vendors here vary significantly in terms of their security capabilities, what kind of detection, prevention, isolation they offer. what kind of accuracy and speed they have to detect threats in the real world, including their ability to stop advanced and zero-day attacks, whether they come as a product that you need to configure and monitor, or whether they come as a managed service, and of course, the level of compatibility they offer with the web, with browsers, and with the enterprise ecosystem in general. So that's kind of something to look at for. And if you're looking to adopt this new category of browser security or enterprise browser, I would highly encourage you to look at three main buckets. The first is the user experience. The second is the level of threat prevention you gain. And the third is the manageability. So from the user experience perspective, you need to make sure you support standard browsers from Microsoft and Google as is, be it Chrome or Edge. You can't reinvent the wheel and give users a whole new browser experience. And you will not be able to keep up with the innovation by Microsoft and Google in the standard browsers, and you want to be able to use their features. You want to make sure that users don't get a lot of false positives, that they're not blocked when trying to visit legitimate websites, and that they don't have significant latency as they browse the web. You want to make sure it's fully compatible with the web, with any website, any application, and there's so many of them out there today. And still to enjoy all of the modern browser features like single sign-on and password management and extensions and so on. So this is super important. Otherwise, your security will not be accepted in the organization. Second is the level of threat prevention. You need to make sure you block both internal insider threats and external threats. And if you can, find a solution that does strong isolation of the browser, not just detection, so that when there is a zero-day vulnerability in the browser, you can really eliminate the risk and the impact from such attacks. You want this to be super accurate and protect also against insiders leaking data out of the browser, as well as go for a solution that sees the wide picture across not just the browser, but other attack vectors like email, collaboration apps, storage, and so on. And finally, as I mentioned, look for enterprise manageability, something that comes as a managed service that, assuming you don't have the manpower for a huge SOC team, you can cope with in a scalable, cost-effective way that's easy to deploy and compatible with the browser ecosystem in general. And last but not least, of course, Perception Point, as part of its offering, also offers advanced browser security, putting isolation, detection, and prevention around the browser. And this is exactly what we've built, something that can do advanced in-depth detection of the browser using any standard browser like Chrome or Edge that runs locally on your machine and doesn't require to proxy traffic and to delay the users, with a lot of built-in browser DLP controls to prevent leakage of data by screenshots or by taking files out. And on top of this, we were able to isolate the browser in a lightweight local VM. So even when you're visiting a website, which is high risk, and it has a zero-day vulnerability, it doesn't get out of this local virtual machine. And regardless, Perception Point doesn't just offer web security, but also email security, collaboration apps, cloud storage, and others. And we can see the big picture and stop campaigns, other tracks with a managed service that is included with the offering. 24/7 IR team that acts as your extended SOC and looks at every incident to troubleshoot and really give you just the real true positives to handle. And of course, all of this is easily deployed either as a browser extension or a light agent, depending on what you're looking to achieve. So this has been my turbo mode, 20 minutes on browser security and why it's interesting and important to focus on that, and reach out if you're interested in learning more.